Atkinson, and I'm here today with Jerry Griffis. Today's date is November 16th, 2009. We're at Ball State University, and we're about to talk about his experiences in the military during the Vietnam War. Mr. Griffis, can you tell me about where you grew up?
Newcastle is my home, Indiana.
And so you grew up there a whole lot, kind of a small town feel?
Yes, very much so.
What was it like growing up in Newcastle? Did you have anybody around you that was in the military, or just kind of a farm community?
We were, my father was a factory worker over there. Everybody in Newcastle worked at Chrysler. My mom was a nurse, so I had stepbrothers, and they were older, and only one had been in service. He was a Korean veteran, and he'd already been in the war and back home when I was growing up. But Newcastle, small, industrial, some plants over there, rural Henry County. I liked it.
What kind of stories did you say it was a brother, an uncle?
A stepbrother, Oral Griffis. Oral was in Korea. He was in, he came out as a sergeant in the Army, and he was, I don't remember what they call that, and you'll probably run across it, the graves registration. They basically picked up bodies and moved them back from trucks to wherever they were being marked and tagged and sent back. Grave registration, that's what Oral was doing.
What kind of things did he tell you about that job, or did you talk about it?
Not a lot. We never really, he was proud being in service and everything. We had no big war stories, and
Anything in your family life that pushed you toward going to the military?
Things weren't going well in school and at home, and in those days, years ago, service was kind of an outlet for, as we called them in the old days, hoodlums and judges, as a alternative to probation or whatever, juvenile. So, you could kind of head towards service, and I'm not sure that was a bad idea. So I was 17 and thinking about getting out of Newcastle, and I was walking past a recruiting station there in Newcastle, and I saw a Marine Corps poster and thought, yeah, I might try that. And this was in the summer, and because I went in and was recruited in September. And I went in, and that recruiter got me immediately because he was good, because I was small, and I was on the wrestling team. I was wrestling 112 pounds. And he said, I don't know if you're strong enough to be a Marine. And I was like, I can do like 500 push-ups. I can do this. So anyway, I think it's... So anyway, I joined, signed up for 4 years. Didn't have a clue what I was getting into. Not a clue. That a big commitment for a 17-year-old.
Had no thoughts at all about what military life would be like?
Clueless. It was just some place to go. I think I'll join the Marines. A couple other guys in older classes, they were already in the Marines. Vietnam was not even on the radar. I didn't even know what that country was. I think in my history class it may have been referred to as Indochina, but I still didn't know what they were talking about. So
what was on the radar internationally? What kind of things did you hear about? Or did you think you were getting into by getting into the military, I guess?
I think we might have had the Cuban blockade going on with Kennedy, and the stare down between Kennedy and the Russians, and mostly that was it. The Cold War was really the hot thing, and there wasn't too much, as far as firefights or anything. Korea had been over since 54, 53, something like that. So it had been about 10 years. So we'd been through the Eisenhower, the Cold War, peacetime stuff.
Kennedy's often talked about as appealing to young people. Did you feel any sort of appeal to Kennedy, and what did you think when he got shot? It was right after you joined the service that he was shot, wasn't it?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I was in boot camp there in November '63 when he was shot, and I was still a recruit, and in the Marine Corps is the lowest form of humanity. We, told nothing, just screamed at, 15 hours a day and running and everything. And there was a formation, and they said, the drill instructor said they killed the president, and get ready, the sons of bitches are coming. At that time, this sounds silly now, but really then you didn't know it was a communist plot, and America's without a leader, and we need to get ready. We're probably going to war. And that was a little bit, and they had a formation, and we were allowed to go to the church there in San Diego, boot camp. They had a big service, I guess, for Kennedys and everything. So, but that finally calmed down. It turned out that, it wasn't who knows what it was.
So it's 1963, and you've signed up.
September 15th.
What happens next?
I bought a nice suit. Parents put me on a bus and everything. My brother, Oral, the one who rode down there with me to get down to Indianapolis, get on the plane. Oral said the drill instructor my recruiter was pretty good. He said, keep your ears open and your mouth shut when you get there. Oral said, don't volunteer for anything. And I flew into San Diego, got off bus there at Marine Corps boot camp, and it was absolute shock. I have never been screamed at and cussed and sworn, and there's usually typically 8 or 10 of you showing up same time till they get a platoon together, about 70. And we were screamed at, our heads shaved, our clothes taken away, field strip, ran through a shower naked. I had another point, I lost it, but it was just a total shock. That's the Marine Corps in those days, not to some degree it still is now. They dump the glass of water, half empty it out, and they start fresh. They're going to build it what they want. So it was a shock getting there. They still have those yellow footprints there, the 45-degree angles, position of attention when you get there. So it was tough. It was hard.
Did you ever think about dropping out? Was that even an option?
That didn't really cross my mind. The only thing that did was that I wanted to graduate in that. I think boot camp was 13 weeks, and I didn't want to get set back. It was a goal. I started with this platoon. I wanted to finish everything, the written, the physical, drill, shooting, everything. I didn't want to spend one more week there, so I dedicated myself to that. And over the weeks, there were guys that had trouble with physical fitness, with running and climbing, and it's called getting set back. They go back for motivation, and I didn't want that. I knew I wanted to graduate in December, whatever it was, and and I did. The obstacle courses and the shooting, I was pretty good at, and did pretty well in most of the stuff. I had a psychological problem on an obstacle course where you run and jump and it's 10 feet and there was a pit there, and for some reason I put it in my mind I can't jump that far, and I remember the first time I fell in that pit and the DI was up there and said, you little fucking maggot, you just stay the fuck in there, don't ever come out, blah blah blah. I don't know if I'm supposed to say bad words in this or not, I don't care, but I went back to the huts there at night in the ground and marked off 10 foot in the dirt and saw this. It's pretty simple to jump. Most of us can jump 10 feet. And you throw your rifle out in front of you and it carries you over. So anyway, that's just a little side thing. But I was happy. That was my own personal obstacle. So I graduated December, whatever it was, 15th, and went up to Garden Grove with a buddy, good buddy I'd made there in boot camp. He was from Garden Grove, so I hung out with his family, so it's kind of neat. He's a big surfer dude.
Can you tell me about some of the guys you met and what, the interactions that you had with people being from small town Indiana?
Yeah, it was a culture shock. This is a good question. I'll be blatantly honest here. Newcastle's not the most diverse place in the world. There were a couple Catholics over there, and that's so when I was some of these black guys in my boot camp from the north and the south, Southerners, white guys, guys from the big city, it was different, different cultures and everything, and some of us got along really well, and some of us didn't. But mostly the guys came together as kind of a glue in there because you all have the same goal to, survive, and I think that's why the Marine Corps does that on purpose. But the big city guys, they were different there. They talked about jazz and smoking dope and things which wasn't even on my radar. And few of the guys were set back. We had one suicide and one suicide attempt in a platoon before one guy shot himself there at the rifle range, and one cut his wrist. And but it's hard. It was hard. Some guys just couldn't get through it.
Did you know these guys that
I knew the one kind of that cut his wrist. I didn't really know the one that shot himself. I heard about it. He went while he was on the rifle range. Of course, you got live ammo because you're qualifying, and he took some ammo in a rifle and went back to the head or restroom. And I think he shot himself. And then and one in my platoon, he was actually in my hut. In the old-fashioned days, we had these Quonset huts out in San Diego. They don't anymore. They have barracks now, 2 or 3 story barracks. We had these old Quonset huts, which are just, I don't know if you've ever seen one. They're just tin roof things, small. He tried cutting his wrist, and I remember they drug him out of the hut, and they was holding his veins off, and they transferred him out, so I'm sure he got out of the Marine Corps. I don't know any details around it. But
you told me when I've talked to you before that Full Metal Jacket best demonstrates or replicates your experience at boot camp.
That was pretty much on the money. Those DIs in the early '60s, there and '50s, they could call you names you couldn't even think of, stringing together that many adjectives. And I mean, as far as I mean, nothing was out of bounds with those guys. You nigger, kike, whop, dago, guinea, little faggot, they threw it all in there, man. I mean, they left nobody, the DIs. It's probably mellowed out a little bit, but Full Metal Jacket, he was pretty much on it. And they were physical in those days to some degree. It wasn't real bad. I got thrown around, slammed a couple of times, but other times it was kind of good to me because I was small and pretty gung-ho, and I got a nickname, Mighty Mouse, But they call the Marine Corps there's an old cliche, it's the $1 million experience. I wouldn't take $1 million for it. I wouldn't go through it again for $1 million either. So I think that's pretty.
Is that true?
I think that's pretty accurate. I couldn't do it now.
So, do you think the training, looking back now, do you think the training prepared you for what you were going to get into in Vietnam? Do you think that was good preparation?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Some people are going to be resilient regardless whether trained or not. Some aren't going to be. But service's basic mandate, or in the Marines, and probably all of them, is regroup, reorganize, improvise, adopt, and overcome. That's the 3 biggies: improvise, adopt, whatever the obstacle. And I think that's kind of good, and I kind of apply that in life too, because you're going to get knocked down. It's guaranteed, whether you're civilian or you're in Vietnam or you're professor at Ball State or you're whatever. So improvise, adopt, and overcome, and get around it somehow. So I think it's pretty good. You've been in the military, so get back up and regroup. So.
Did the group push along those guys that fell behind? What kind of things did the rest of did peer pressure play? What role did peer pressure play?
Some mass punishment was not unknown, so you didn't want, you didn't want to be singled out for screwing up in drill or an obstacle course or a run dropping out, and I'm sure there was a lot of pressure for those guys that guys that were a little out of shape. It's really hard, and but having said that, everybody was kind of into their own thing. Just, I want to get through my thing. If Joe Blow falls back there, I'm not dragging his butt. He's going to have to get through it. And I forget. I think the run was. I think it was 3 miles, but it's been too many years, and this was in with combat gear on, and it was a run walk, however you got it done, but you had to get And I was always proud in those days. I think I was the first white guy in my platoon. I think I was fourth. So I was in good shape in those days. But and then the shooting for the Marine Corps is an absolute. It's almost a religious thing. They're qualifying either as an expert or sharpshooter, and it's hard to believe. 500 meters is a long way to see a 6-inch thing laying there in prone position. You can't breathe, take a breath without squeezing. It's got to be really. And the Marine Corps prides itself. Everybody is on that qualifying. And that is probably one of the most disgraceful things in boot camp, not to qualify. Now, you can still graduate. You can get through. But, man, I mean, there was a lot of pressure on that. And I was lucky there again. I qualified pretty high. They have expert, and then there's one below it, sharpshooter. I made sharpshooter all the time. But that was really a lot of pressure, and I'm sure it is still today. The Marine Corps prides itself. Everybody's a rifleman. If you're a clerk, you're a rifleman if need be. So
after boot camp, it's December 15th, 1963, correct? And you didn't get into Vietnam for another 2 years.
Yeah.
What happened in that 2 years?
Camp Pendleton. When I was interviewed for, went through placement there in boot camp. I remember the guy was, "What have you done?" I was 17, I said, well, I'd had paper routes and this and that and worked in grocery stores. And I remember I said, well, I've been painting with my brothers, Oral, that one up in Michigan. They had a small business, Griffis Brothers Painting. So I spent the summer with them. So I said I was a painter. I didn't realize how big that statement was. It was just, so later on I saw I was assigned to engineers, Marine Corps combat engineers, and I was like, what the hell's that got to do? Well, the guy roughly kind of threw it. It was as close as he could get. And combat engineers in the Marines, and I think the Army too, you build stuff or you're also in demolitions and experts. So I got sent up to an engineer, as first engineers there at Camp Pendleton, California. And spent about, I guess, a year and a half there. I think we shipped out in January or March of 60. We took off sometime in 65 for Hawaii. We formed a battalion landing team. That's when I went to Kaneohe Bay. So after a year or two in at Camp Pendleton, California, I went to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii for 6 more months training with that BLT, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines landing team for another 6 months. And finally, in about January of 66, we hit Vietnam, Operation Jack Stay, our first invasion or operation.
What was the training like in Hawaii? What were they telling you were going to face?
Booby traps. And as engineers, we ran some of the courses. We set some of the stuff up for the grunts, for the infantry guys, and we prepared them what we thought we would encounter in Vietnam. Punji traps, which is nothing more than a big-ass hole. It's real deep, covered over with leaves and stuff, and it's got sticks on the bottom with crap on them, and guys could fall in, or trip wires with different kind of really crude, maybe just a grenade with a pin straightened out with a trip wire, fish wire across the net. So we trained in all that kind of stuff as engineers, learning what kind of booby traps we was going to run in Vietnam, which is rightly so. And we also, one of the most telling things I'd ever seen when I was in Hawaii, we had a demonstration or a lecture by a guy we was training on the beach about what to do with a prisoner that you didn't have time to jack with. And I thought that was my first introduction to the real world, about how to turn him around. You didn't have to be mean about it with your 45 and get rid of him. And and it was very methodical. I mean, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't like nobody's pissed off or anything. It was just business, and we were things like that.
After Hawaii, you went straight to Vietnam from Hawaii for
Ye-
Operation Jack Stay?
Yeah, they put us aboard ship, and they took this battalion landing team. We was on the Princeton USS, well, not USS, whatever it is. Yeah, USS Princeton is a carrier, and we made a helicopter assault landing in the Mekong Delta called Operation Jack Stay, and we stayed in that swamps there and swept that for about, I think it was about 2 weeks. I was in that operation.
Was that your first time with helicopters, using helicopters to fly in, air cavalry?
I think it might have been. I don't really remember any helicopters there in Hawaii or California. We did some amphibious landings there in California where they would bring, like in the old days, the Marines up on those LSTs, drop the ramp, you would hit the beach, waist deep in water and go up. We did a lot of that, but helicopter, I think that was my first. We got on board there of the ship that morning, had the traditional steak and eggs, put our flak jackets on, was told, get ready guys, there's some serious shit you're going into. It was early in the morning, and everybody was scared to death, and we had no idea what we was going to encounter, and rumors were flying. And hell, when I got there, I think there was a CBS cameraman filming us when we got off or something, you know. It was about like apocalypse now, so.
I've always wanted to ask somebody who's actually done the air assaults like that. With the door open, did you feel like you're going to fall out? That may be a silly question, but...
Well, yeah, I guess if that helicopter turned, but, you know, we'd get pretty far back, and there was a door gunner sitting there. He was pretty close to the door, and he probably was strapped in. But, yeah, you kind of had to get away from that door, yeah. Those old Huey helicopters, yeah. Yeah. You was always glad to see them come in to pick you up, man. They were a welcome sight to get a ride, get out of there.
So you jump out of the helicopter, just like the movies, right?
Yep, just like the movies.
What was your first, what are your senses? What would you smell? What did you feel? What did you see?
Vietnam's got a smell like nothing else. When I went back in '68, it's still the same. I can't even describe it. But I don't really remember. Your first thing as Marines and helicopters is secure the LZ, the landing zone, spread out, get a perimeter around, and they get away from the helicopters. So I don't remember. It's been too long. We formed up, and of course we took off on a sweep, a major, infantry battalion sweep, probably with a platoon up front, 2 on the flank. I was kind of protected a little bit being an engineer. I was carrying demolitions and stuff. I was carrying 40 pounds of C4 in my pack, plastic explosive and blasting caps, and I was supposed to be the expert for booby traps. When the point man would hit something, you'd hear engineers up, and they'd call you up, for that kind of stuff.
So were you well respected within the group? Did everybody...
Oh, yeah, they liked engineers, and we were carrying that C4 at plastic explosives, which is great. You could light it with a match. See, it won't explode without a blasting cap, but you can light it, and if you want to heat a cup of coffee in like 20 seconds, man, this stuff was really hot. So we were popular there, but, yeah, C4 demolition, but...
So you said that Operation Jack Stay was a couple weeks, and then...
A couple weeks. It really was not... that productive. I looked online. Of course, being a grunt at that time, I didn't know what was going on. The line said there was, we lost like 8 guys were killed. I forget how many BC was killed. I think we had 1 drowning. We was in swamps a lot. There was a Marine killed one night. I was on perimeter. I watched that. I listened to it. I'll never forget the gurgling sound he was making. I think he was shot. He somehow got out in front of the perimeter. I don't remember the details. It was dark. And I heard some yelling over beside me. It was another Marine, an infantryman, and I was with my buddy. Usually engineers, there's a couple of us together. And I heard, halt, stop, God damn it, stop. And it was with a automatic fire with an M14. And next, it seemed like there was yelling. And I'll never forget, I always heard his gurgling. And he was dying. He got shot. He got out in front of the perimeter pretty bad, so there were medics in there. That was one of our casualties, just a Marine killed by another Marine. It happens.
You engaged the enemy though, correct? As well.
I don't remember a lot of engagement, to tell you the truth. I honestly don't. I don't know that I ever fired my weapon.
What kind of thoughts did you have about that friendly fire incident?
Nothing real profound. It just happened, you know.
A part of being in the military.
Yeah, I just, you know, again, you was 17 or 18. It's like, damn, man. So I don't know. I don't know. You just don't dwell on it a lot at that time. Maybe that's why they want you to be 18 or 19 in service.
So you hadn't really discharged your rifle yet, and then you're out, correct? After 2 weeks, did they take you back to?
We went back, flew us back out to the Princeton, the ship. You know, we had showers and hot food and everything, and yeah. And then they took us up to Chulai. We disembarked and put us with, I think that's when I went with 9th Engineers, 9th Engineer Battalion. I stayed with 1st Engineers a while, and then there was 9th Engineers, 2 different groups. But then we stayed there and was assigned 2 infantry groups to go back on patrols out of Chulai, or big operations, over the next year or 2.
Can you tell me about some of the smaller individual patrols that you went on during this time?
They were just pretty much a one-night deal. We was out in front of our perimeter, set up a perimeter for the night, patrol, small groups. It really wasn't anything spectacular. You'd come across villages, and you're dying. It's hot. Trying to find some clean water, and eating sea rations, and you go in the village and VC here, no VC, okay, you VC, no VC, okay, and move on. It just occasionally might be sniper fire, nothing much happened. Go back to the main base there at Chulai, and maybe set a patrol overnight.
Did you run into many booby traps? You were in charge of disarming these booby traps, right?
I ran into a few, and I was really lucky because they must have been really crude, or I'd have stumbled into them, like a grenade with a pin across it, and then we'd run into catches of big clay pots, someplace they hid out in the jungle that had oil in them or gasoline or something like that. And they didn't have the resources we did. They were really creative, and as an engineer, mostly I'd just blow stuff up. They'd find, put some C4 there, they'd find your tunnel, hey, give me some C4, I'll blow it up. I'd light it, everybody move away, fire in the hole, put a long fuse cord on it, so get away, bam, everything's blown to hell, move on. And, I know they replaced it probably 2 days after we're gone, so, And the villagers were saying, no VC here. Well, hell no, of course there weren't, what are they going to say, because we're going to be gone, and the VC are going to be back, and they're going to get their throat cut if they went along with us, so they were in a bad place.
So what did you think of Vietnamese civilians? Did you have any thoughts? Did you like them? Did you dislike them?
I actually liked them. I thought, for the most part, they were pretty people, they were gentle people. Some of them had Eurasian cross French, a little bit. They're small people. I liked them pretty. I really liked them. I know, some of the old vets, with, dinks, slopes, chinks, commie sons of, whatever. But I don't think, and I know about the hideous things committed by Japanese and to American soldiers and the Germans, but on balance, and things were rough for our POWs there at Hanoi. I'm not ever saying that it wasn't, but on balance, I don't think they're that mean of people. I don't think it's in their nature. And they've been invaded by the Chinese, the Japanese, the French, and us, and they kicked every one of them out of their country, every one of them. They've never lost. If you think about that, that country been invaded 4 times, and they're still Vietnam. So, they're very nationalistic. They like their country, and I don't know. I think Walmart may invade them next. They'll probably win, though. But,
were you aware of that history when you were young, when you were
a
19-year-old kid at this time? Aware of their history of being invaded?
No, I wasn't. No, had no idea. No.
Now, as I understand it, your first really large-scale engagement where you caught enemy fire was Operation Colorado. Is that correct?
that was the worst combat operation we were in.
Can you just run me through that? Exactly what happened? Where were you when rockets started coming in, or when you started taking fire?
According to the internet, and I didn't know at the time where the hell we were. I think we were about 30 miles west of Chulai, up towards the. Vietnam is just all flat for like 1,200 miles per mile in, and then the rest of it's mountains. It's a weird country, but we were on patrol, another patrol. Infantrymen. It's a pretty big operation. Helicopters had dropped us off. We're on a sweep, march through mud, rice paddy, village, jungle. And I remember it was late in the afternoon, and we started hearing some firing up front, shots being fired, and pop, 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 and and so we and I was far enough back in the column with the engineers again, me and 3 or 4 guys. We just literally sat down and was smoking. It was like, the point guys, they ran into a sniper and they'll get him or move on, and it just went on, and it escalated, and it went on, and finally there was heavy fire, and it was like, man, something's really going on up front there, and we're, I don't know, 300 yards back or something. Guys are spread out, and it went on, and all I can say is, it's not like things are real organized like you think in the movies, like move left and move right. It's just fucked up. People are, a lot of times guys don't even know, and this is the old days with radios and stuff. And we moved up, me and the engineer, mainly, we didn't have to, but I want to see what was going on. And I remember going through a rice paddy, and guys were trying to drag a body, and I grabbed him and I helped carry him back. And there was 4 of us. We each had an arm and a leg. Was moving him back into the center of away from the front. And I was looking at him, and his eyes were open. Of course, he was dead. And he was a corpsman I recognized from being aboard ship. We was back on the Princeton, and just very small holes in him. They're not like big, And we got him back, and the fighting went on, and I literally wasn't really. You just don't see people. It's not like there's a line, you're a line. And we may have returned some fire, and I stayed with the engineers waiting to do what we do. And I remember night came in, and they set us up on perimeter. And it was very scary at night. And then during the night, there was helicopters coming in with more troops. I think they called for backup. And guys came along the perimeter and joined us there, which I was really happy to see. There was more grunts, and nothing happened. We weren't hit that night. Next morning, they started body counts and all that, and I learned later there was like hundreds of Viet Cong killed. I don't know how many Marines were killed, but it was a pretty bloody one. And then the biggies flew in, the brass, marching around with their starch collars and everything, and their pictures taken and everything, and the grunts that were there all looking nasty, but so.
In my reading, Operation Colorado was a joint operation with the South Vietnamese Army. Were you aware of that at the time, or were you just in your own world doing your own thing with your...
I guess I didn't know that much about what little contact we had with the Vietnamese would be attached to us was a so-called interpreter, which is, he could say, he VC, no VC, or something. That was about the extent of it. So, but I didn't know that was a joint. I did not know that there was a joint South Vietnamese force with us on that.
Did you have much interaction with the South Vietnamese Army during your time in Vietnam?
Very little. I wouldn't want them to have my back. I wouldn't want. I wouldn't trust them. Or the standing joke was, if you had a South Vietnamese rifle, it'd never been fired and only dropped once. I don't think their heart was in it either. They were conscripted, I'm sure, but I wouldn't. And I'm sure there's probably some that was really gallant and fighting for their country and all that, but I just wanted other Marines around me. I didn't want South Vietnamese soldiers covering my back.
How'd that make you feel, knowing that it seemed like the South Vietnamese Army wasn't willing to do their part? The civilians seemed to be kind of indifferent.
You know, I don't know. I was only 18, 19. I had a buddy back, my best friend in Newcastle. He was going to Wabash College. He was totally on the other side of the fence. He was campaigning for Gene McCarthy, and we're best friends. And he was sending me letters, and he was saying, Ho Chi Minh is a nationalist. That's all he cares about is a united country. He doesn't give a shit about communism or democracy or anything else. And it turns out Mark was probably right, but I wasn't very political. Hell, I was a high school dropout. You know, I hadn't even. Mark was going to Wabash, so the politics of it was really confusing to me, and I think a lot of young veterans. Most of us were blue-collar kids. Most of us were, not all, but you know, we were from blue-collar families. We didn't come from college.
Can you tell me about some of the booby traps that you encountered while in Vietnam? I know you talked about that a little bit, and what I'm really getting at is, did they meet your expectations? You said in Hawaii that you kind of made mock obstacle course or booby traps for to train on, and I'm just wondering if you guys had it right or if things were completely different than what you expected.
I honestly didn't run into that much. We had things that were set up with spikes in the ground and tripwires. I guess we didn't get it. I didn't see that much, quote, booby traps. I didn't see it.
When I talked to you the first time, you described yourself as a tunnel rat. Can you talk a little bit about that? Did you actually crawl through some tunnels?
Yeah, I did. When they call for the point man, he's the first guy in the leading the sweep, the infantryman. He's the guy up front with a rifle, you know. And then there's usually guys on the flank. And the point man, he's guy's very, very dangerous job. And but if he gets something suspicious, he just stop and, you know, engineers up. And that's when they call us up, and we were supposedly the experts. He may have had a tunnel. I did sweep a few of them. One of the officers or staffs would give me his .45 pistol, which we carried rifles. We didn't have pistols, but the officers and the staff NCOs, they had 45s. Give me a 45 and flashlight, and go down and check it out and crawl in there. Looking back on it now, it's insanity. But when you're 19, you think you're pretty invincible. Invincible. I didn't run across anything except one time I did hear something in there, and it turned out to be a dog, you know, and I was surprised I didn't shoot it. But generally, I'd back out, say there's nothing there. They'd say close it up, got it. I went to this extensive demolition training about using these formulas, like if you're going to blow up a bridge or steel or wood or how much, there's a K factor, and then and I couldn't remember any of that shit, so I'd say, give me 40 pounds of C4. And I'd blow the hell out of it, close the tunnel, and we'd move on. And there's no doubt in my mind they probably had it dug out by that night. It was back, so.
What other, what kind of experiences did you have back at base? Was there ever a safe time? You'd said about being dropped off in rice paddies and then you came back. Where'd you come back to?
We had, the 9th Engineers had a big base and perimeter there at Chu Lai with a mess hall, showers such as they were, hot food. We were in tents and there was a perimeter around there with bunkers and everything. And it was an engineer battalion, so I mean there was part of it was heavy equipment. The guys had dump trucks and backhoes and stuff. They did a lot of road work and stuff like that, and airstrips. So we had a pretty secure base there at Chu Lai. The beach was to our back, so we was okay there. And then the perimeter, it's all sandy and clear. And we'd go back there and like I said, there was hot food, showers, pretty decent, you know, with tents and everything. and screens. A little bit of electricity is very limited sometimes. We would work there and do road patrols and sweeps during the day when we weren't on regular duty or building something. You know, sometimes we'd help the Vietnamese. We'd build stuff, and we'd build stuff. Yeah.
Did the base come under fire?
Chu Line never came under while I was there. No, we had perimeter duty, but the big base didn't. The smaller, the out ones, occasionally they had different hill numbers, and I don't remember Hill 57 and stuff like that. There'd be occasional assault there.
How many days were you in the field, and then how many days did you have back at the base? Was it fairly routine, or was it always different?
I don't know. I don't remember. Operation would come up and they'd assign a platoon to go with the 5th Marines, and probably a third of it was in the field, maybe 2/3 back on the base, maybe.
Earlier you talked about kind of a wake-up call when you were taught how to deal with prisoners. Did your unit ever come in, ever capture any prisoners, and how did you guys handle that, if you did?
We had a few occasionally. They were bound with blindfolded and passed on back. I didn't see them beyond that. We didn't mess with them. We just passed them back to whoever. Interrogation. So there were a few prisoners. And you know, honestly, whether they're prisoners or farmers, or whether Viet Cong or farmers, who knows? You know. I'm sure if they had a weapon and everything, but sometimes it's hard to tell the bad guys from the good guys in a war like that.
After Chu Lai, where did you move to?
Our very last transfer, I got moved up to Khe Sanh, and it seemed like that was just the past month or two before. My rotation came up in January of '68. I was going to go home. I'd been there 2 years, and we went up to, they moved some of the 9th Engineers up to Khe Sanh, and we set up a perimeter there, and I don't remember what was going on or why, but that was really remote, tense. I stayed there. We set up some perimeters. I don't think I went on any patrol. We was right on the edge of the mountains there, and the basic tour in Vietnam was 13 months. That was the old days, 13 months, and you were done. They had a deal, if you stayed for 6 more months, you could, extended, you could fly any place in the world for 30 days. The Marine Corps pay your transportation and not take it off your leave time. So I extended once and went back to Newcastle, and then the second time, when my time was up, I had a buddy from Germany. He was a German Marine. Said, "You want to go back to Kiel, Germany with me?" Which is by Strasbourg. I said, "Sure." So I extended again. He was a lifer in the Marine Corps, or a career Marine sergeant. His name was Dean Liner. And so me and Dean flew to Germany and partied for 30 days, and then I came back. So that's how I ended up with almost 2 years in Vietnam, because I only had to do 13 months, but I was getting combat pay. I was single. It didn't matter to me where I was at,
What was that experience like in Germany, to be removed from the jungles of Vietnam, and then?
It was pretty. That was another big culture. His mom and dad were divorced. His dad was in Vienna, and his mom was in Kiel, Germany, I think, which is Kale. I remember it was right across the river from Strasbourg, and we hung out there for like 30 days. And I was introduced to German taverns and beer and singing and food, and hardly anybody spoke English, and I was lost most of the time, and it was a pretty neat time. And the only thing, my buddy's dad had been in the German army, was a Nazi, whatever you call him. But Dean's dad, and he was a big shot German businessman nowadays, but he was in the German army, was captured, and the only thing he knew, he knew that the people holding him was called the Rainbow Division. I don't know what that is in the Army, and the only English he remembered was "you fucking Germans." So, yeah, it was what Mr. Liner remembered that line. So, but he was real good. We had a great time there in Germany. We had a nice German and we rode by train from Vienna to Kiel, and we had told, oh, in Austria you have to be in civilian uniforms in those days. Probably still is. You can't be in military because it's a neutral country. But it was a neat time. Flew TWA and flew over there, and it was a neat time. So and then I went back to Vietnam. So
when you told people that you were in the U.S. Marines, what did they have any reaction? What'd they say?
They, I don't remember. I was translation. I couldn't understand half this stuff was going on, and they were kind of interested in the race things because at the time there had been some riots in the United States, some black things that exploded in Watts or Detroit or something, and they were like, what? They were more talk about that, I think, than Vietnam and what was going on, and so.
Was race an issue in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, it was and it wasn't. You could probably get away with more political incorrect stuff being in an infantry unit in the jungle and kidding and saying, you might say nigger and not get killed those days. On the other hand, they could say, quit playing that country music shit. We don't want to hear it. But we were actually taking care of each other, and we got along, and I think it was important, probably more so in Vietnam, that we had each other's backs, as they say nowadays. But of course, as soon as you come back to the States, they went their way and we went ours, and so there was some division, but then there was also some camaraderie between guys counted on each other. So, but there was always that, black Marine, the white guys, and stuff. And man, what kind of music you listening to? And man, we'll listen to this. This is blah blah blah. And so.
You talked about the home front a little bit. What kind of news did you get from the United States while you were in Vietnam?
I think I had a subscription to Time magazine back then. It was limited. There's the military newspaper, I forget what it's called, Stars and Stripes, so you'd get some there, but it's pretty propaganda, they're pretty, and it was limited. It's not like nowadays, no internet, you didn't, things were delayed, mailed the old-fashioned way on mail call. It was a week old or 2 weeks old, no TV, and the only radio up there, again, was a military thing out of, Good Morning Vietnam, that kind of stuff. So, not so much, you just kind of, I'll be honest with you, our main thing was like, man, have you heard that new thing the Beatles did, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, or that Beach Boys' Pet Sound? Wow, that was kind of that was culture for us, man.
So did you have music stations that you could listen to?
There was some radio stations out of Saigon that played. I think those were military stations that played music, and in those days you could still get. Sometimes guys would get albums, and some of the huts there that had electricity, they'd actually have record players and stuff. And you listen to stuff.
Earlier you talked about smoking dope and. Not necessarily you, but you said that some of the guys from the big city were talking about it in basic training. Did that carry over? What was the drug scene like in Vietnam?
It wasn't like the movies, at least what I saw in there, where everybody was on it. And I was there early there, 66, 67. I got out in 68. And I've seen the movies and everybody was. But that was my first experience where they said, some of the other guys said, well, if you go outside the perimeter and get out there in the village, they bought some dope. And I'd heard a little bit about it. And this sounds silly, but being from Newcastle in the early 50s and stuff, to me that was about like shooting heroin. I didn't even know what they was talking about, And some of the bigger city guys, it was just marijuana, And the Vietnamese was, that country's ripe for growing, So they already knew a little bit about it, but it wasn't horrendous, like everybody was stoned all the time. Actually, alcohol was probably more of a problem. After a patrol, you was allowed 2 beers, and some guys got more than that. We had there on the base, like at Chulai, we had a club which you could go over and drink, get cold beer. And I never drank. I always swapped mine for 2 Cokes or whatever. But sometimes guys would get drunk, and that was a real problem, and fight, get crazy and stupid and mean. So that happens.
Do you have anybody that you wrote to back home?
Yeah, I had a couple of nieces, my parents. Kind of a girlfriend on and off thing, couple of things. We would get pen pals, I wanted to write servicemen. I remember when I was on leave in Hawaii, met some girls, a couple girls there, me and my buddy, they were secretaries on vacation. They always wrote and stuff, but nothing ever came of it. But yeah, we wrote. Letters are really important. I got from my parents and nieces and a few family members, stuff like that.
Why were they so important?
Well, it was just huge, a mail call to hear your name, say, Griffis, or Smith, it was just huge to tear that open, say, here's a letter from home, and, it just be nothing, it's snowing here in Indiana, and, I don't even remember, but, and Barb had a baby last month or whatever, and, it'd just be 2 or 3 pages of handwritten stuff. Way before the internet, so.
What kind of things did you write?
God, that's a hard question. I don't, just crap about the weather and stuff. I never really went into detail about what was going on, or, sure miss home, and home cooking or something. We'd like to get back. We'll be back in, 2 days or whatever. I don't know.
So it really wasn't important what was said. It was just the fact that you got a letter.
That was huge. Letters were huge, huge. Some guys got packages with cakes and cookies and all kinds of crap in them, and we'd tear those open. And that was a big deal,
When you did hear news of the home front, were you aware of the fact that students were protesting? I guess would be a better question.
I don't know how aware I was of that scene, and I don't know that was really when that really got rolling, the protest, the anti-war stuff. Probably 66 wasn't much shaking. 67 it was starting. I remember coming back in 68, and right after that, Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King got killed. And then all hell was breaking loose there in 68 because of Vietnam, the presidential election, and I kind of, like a lot of guys, just set that out and watched, and it wasn't like the days nowadays where you walked around and said, hey, I'm a veteran, we just moved back in, and just, I didn't really get into politics that much. What I think, ironically, what tripped our trigger, and this is weird, was 1982, I think it was. I was sitting there watching TV, and they got those hostages, embassy hostages, been captured, and during Jimmy Carter's thing, and then as soon as Reagan came in, they released them or something, remember? And they got this huge parade, these guys have been in the embassy, and I think it was Iran. And they had this parade, and I was sitting here at home on TV, and it wasn't just me. I found out later it was veterans all over the country, especially Vietnam, go, what the fuck is that about? These guys are heroes, man, because they got captured and turned loose, and we've been invisible since Vietnam. And it was almost like it was a catalyst, and I went out and formed Delaware County, Vietnam Veterans of Delaware County, and immediately had 80 guys signed up, and, we met downtown there, and guys who just came out from every place and said, hey, let's, and then we started to say, hey, what about Agent Orange, and what about this and this, and disability? And I noticed there was, and it wasn't just me, but the Vietnam Veterans of America exploded, and sometime along there they said, hey, how about building a wall in Washington, D.C., and that Jan, what's his name, started that, and so
Mr. Griffis, I'd like to, if you don't mind, switch the tape and then talk about
Case on.
And I wanted to. That was your last. Station.
Yes.
And after that, okay, you know you're going to come home. What kind of things did you do to prepare?
I got my rotation orders. I remember we were on the perimeter up there at Caisson doing what we always did, was stringing barbed wire and setting up perimeters and bunkers and holes. And in those days, you didn't rotate with a unit. It was more of an individual when your time was up. So that was another thing I think caused some problems with Vietnam vets and others. Your whole guys didn't come home together. So it's like, Griffis, you're rotating. So I remember running around the perimeter, most guys shaking hands, saying, "Hey, I'll see you guys. Take care, man. Hey, Griffis, ride us." "Yeah, we'll do," which never did. Got on a truck. They look like a dump truck. I think they're called 6x, and rode back down to Da Nang Airport. Very scared, thinking, "Boy, this is really a good time to get killed or blown up when you're on your way out." Nothing happened. Got to Da Nang, processed out, flew back, got on I think it was civilian airline. Can't remember if that was civilian. I think it was. TWA might have had a contract in those days. Flew out of Da Nang and flew us. I think we stopped at Wake Island and finally Treasure Island, California. A long flight. And I remember sitting there in the plane as the plane was up there, hanging out there with my old-fashioned 35 Minolta, taking pictures of that country, thinking, this is a big deal. This is a country. It's been a big part of your life. You're not going to see it again. So I remember keeping those pictures from the plane and got back. I had a little bit of time left in the Marine Corps. I got out March 15th, hung around with a company there, didn't do anything for about 60 days till I processed out. And then finally they released me, went down to LA Airport, and it was really a tough time because I was only 21. I'd had 4 years in the Marine Corps. I didn't know what I was going home to. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a, quote, career Marine. They were guys called them lifers then. I didn't want that, but I didn't know what else I was going to do. So I flew back to Newcastle, had a little bit of mustering out pay, bought a brand new 68 Firebird, Pontiac Firebird 400 with a 4-speed transmission, fire engine red, which turned out to be the biggest cop magnet in the world, and bounced around with some jobs there. I think they tried to give it preference. I think they were really, the employment offices was saying, "Well, this guy's a veteran. We've got a job here at the Western Southern Insurance. Would you like being an insurance man?" And I was like, "No, I wouldn't want to do that." And so I did take that for a while, and it was like being a high-paid paper route, going around collecting, money like they used to do in the old days, monthly, $10 for your thing. So I did that and some factory work. Finally drifted over to Muncie here, Warner Gear and other things. Jobs were good in those days, really good. Industry was booming. Chevy, Warner Gear, Westinghouse, Marhofer, Ball Brothers. There was a lot of work. It wasn't like these kids coming back from Iraq now. There was a lot of jobs. So
this may sound crazy, and tell me if it is, but did you ever miss Vietnam? Did you ever miss kind of the excitement? You seem to have come back to life in Muncie or in Newcastle, and wasn't quite as exciting as it was in Vietnam.
There was no carryover. It was just a total transition to civilian life, and maybe it was a good thing. Maybe I ought to go back to that. But the military was just gone. It wasn't anything anybody knew about or talked about or bragged about in those days. He was just, you changed in civilian clothes and moved right back in. And I remember I started hanging out in a lot of bars and stuff in the evening and drinking. And I'm not a drinker, so it was almost forced drinking to get drunk and just to drink and hang out with people and socialize, or if you call it socializing. And I was single, of course, still, and keeping a pretty busy social, active social life with girls, best I could. So Yeah.
Did you pay attention to the news coming out of Vietnam? For instance, the Tet Offensive was right after you left. What kind of thoughts did you have?
I remember it was the first political letter in my life I'd ever written. I wrote one to then Senator Birch Bayh, and there was some talk about, you know, the Doves and the Hawks were forming up and withdrawal from Vietnam and escalate and blah, 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 and all that. And I remember I wrote, said, if we get out, I think there's going to be a bloodbath. They will slaughter everybody in South Vietnam if we're not there. And I remember I got a form letter. That was the first letter I'd ever written in my life. I got a form letter back from Birch Bayh. He was Senator Evan Bayh's dad, and was senator from Indiana for a long time, and said, you know, foreign relations were taking a hard look and blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what he said, but nothing. But I guess I honestly felt that way. They were going to slaughter all the South Vietnamese, which they didn't, but there were a lot of people killed at the North Vietnamese considered enemies when they invaded the South. Of course, that was later on in '75 when they rolled in and we rolled out.
What kind of other recollections do you have about being a returning vet? That's the late '60s. The student protests are really ramping up toward the late '60s, early '70s. What kind of thoughts did you have at the time, and maybe what kind of thoughts do you have about that now?
Oh, you know, at the time it probably pissed you off a little bit. I moved up to West Lafayette. I got married there in '69, me and my wife, and we got jobs up there in West Lafayette, and we were on campus, although we were apartments, everybody else was Purdue students, and I saw there was a big deal going on over on campus, Purdue, you know, kind of wandered through that and watched it, and it was like, you know, I didn't really get it, and one way it pisses you off, and yeah, so it was just, I didn't get it, and like most veterans, you know, I just despised Jane Fonda, and you know, and over the years things changed. You're like, well, you know, none of those guys had to go to Vietnam, you know, so why are they protesting, you know, because they're all middle-class kids with credit cards in their pockets, and what the fuck do they care about Vietnam? They ain't going anyway, you know, and that was another thing. They had college deferments in those days. You got a college deferment, which is probably the biggest mistake ever made in the draft, ever, and on paper it sounded good. Well, if you're going to college, you don't have to go to service. Well, God, you know, well, guess who went to service and who stayed home, you know? It was so discriminatory, you know. The blue-collar kids were going in, and if you were in college, and those were the kids from middle class, not all, but for the most part, you know, they were pretty affluent kids, you know, and they didn't want to go. And so that student deferment probably wasn't a good idea if you're ever going to have a draft, you know. I don't know.
Did you feel like when you were in Vietnam, were there a lot of draftees that were in the Marines?
I don't remember seeing them. I don't think the Marine Corps was that big on the draft at that time. I don't remember.
So the Vietnam Veterans of Delaware County. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
I don't know exactly how that exploded, but, and this sounds stupid, but it had something to do. It was like when those Iranian hostages was parading, and there was parades and homecomings, and they met, and we were like, man, how'd those guys get to be heroes? You know, they were in a friggin' embassy, and, you know, they got their ass kicked and taken. So, you know, and they probably had a hard time, but they were prisoners for, well, I don't know, whatever it was, a few months till Reagan came in. And but anyway, something exploded, and I forget how this happened, but some other guy wrote a letter to the editor and said, we ought to get that. And I remember he was from Yorktown, Terry, and I called him and I said, I think that's a good idea. And me and him got together, and then we put out public notice that Vietnam vets want to meet. We're going to meet down at Muncie Central. They let us have a classroom or a library, and hell, there was about 50 or 100 guys showed up, and we said we're just Vietnam vets. And I remember it was we were separate from the American Legion and the VFW and all those old clubs, and the guys all felt the same way. Nothing against them, but it was like we're a different deal. And ironically, this is a side note. if you watch on TV today, you'll see, "Welcome home, brother, the Afghanistan, Iraqi veterans of America." And that's a problem with American Legion and some of the old groups, because they need those guys for new blood, or those groups are going to die off. But we were the same way. That was our deal. Vietnam, we understood it. Nobody else did, you know. And we were pissed off in a lot. There was at a lot of levels. Agent Orange was not understood. We knew that there was guys dying from that, but the VA had refused to recognize there was any connection between that and any diseases. We lost a war. We were pissed off about that, or losing it. We felt betrayed by our country. We despised Jane Fonda, but on the other hand, we felt that our country had not backed us like they should. They wanted us to be the warriors, but so you know, like most veterans, they love their country, but somehow they hated their government. The other issues, the VFW at that point, at one point in their history, said Vietnam wasn't really a war, you know, so we weren't eligible for membership. And a lot of vets were saying, "Well, fuck you, man. There was just 60,000 guys in a body bag." Now nowadays, VFW and all these groups more than welcome any, you know, veteran, you know. But that was a little bit of an issue. Now, American Legion, to their credit, always welcomed, you know, veterans there. But so there was issues going on, you know, like it. But anyway, so we got together. Guys came out. I went down to an attorney friend. I was starting to get involved local a little bit in Democrat politics. Mick Alexander wrote a article of incorporation for us. He's a big hot rod, locally famous criminal attorney. He wasn't then. He may probably that was just before he ran for prosecutor. But Mick, he did articles of incorporation for me with the state, so we became a quote nonprofit group. We had some a building donated to us by a car dealer. Formed our own organization, and then we said, let's build a wall to put the names of the local guys killed on it, kind of like they did in Washington, D.C. And so there was a lot of work went in that, so we got a lot of donations, and it's down at Heaton Park now, and there's 57 names on it locally, guys KIA, killed in Vietnam, killed in action. And we held a concert out at the Prairie Creek. We had local bands come in, and a local guy who was kind of big at that time named Steve Warner. He was a country singer. He was pretty big then. He basically did it for nothing. We paid him a couple $1,000, and we had a big concert there. We called it Nam Jam. Oh, hey, that's what it was. And raised money. We built that wall in Heaton Park. And after that, over a few years, it kind of dissolved. Guys went into the VFW and the American Legion, and it kind of went away. The Vietnam veterans, Delaware County.
In the 1970s, did you ever go into an American Legion or a VFW and I don't know, with anybody else? I'm just wondering how the World War II or the Korean veterans treated you guys. You personally, I guess.
Oh, they were fine. Yeah, I think the older guys fine, but I really didn't. I never was that much into the bar scene with the Legions and VFW. I was in a couple times, but to be honest with you, very little. I didn't have very much interest in it. Never did.
You said you never really felt welcome. Was that from individuals within these groups in Delaware County, or was it just a general feeling that the VFW, the American Legion, wasn't for us as Vietnam veterans?
Both.
How did that come about? I mean, how did you know that? Did they say?
Well, the VFW had really had a policy first that Vietnam wasn't a recognized war, because VFW is Veterans of Foreign Wars. And American Legion, actually, for membership there, you have to show wartime service to be a veteran, to be a member in there. Now, they all have these auxiliary groups, and the only way they can survive is to have the sons and the daughters and the wives, so they make these auxiliary. But to be a member like the Legion, that's wartime service. You had to be in Korea be in service between 1950 and 55, World War II between 1941 and 1945, Vietnam 1964 to 1975 now, what VA recognizes. So if you weren't in one of those war times like 80 to 82, theoretically you're not eligible for Legion or VFW membership. And when they first said Vietnam wasn't a war, man, I mean, that was VFW. That was salt on the wound, you know. Guys coming back from that. So you know, they're very patriotic. Most of the guys are very proud of their service. They felt they went when they were called, but then again, they felt deserted to some extent by the country. You know, the politicians. You know, between Jimmy Carter and that was before Carter, Nixon and Johnson and stuff. You know, let's don't bomb. Peace is at hand. You know, let's negotiate. Blah blah blah. You know. One side saying we could have won this war, let's go up and kick Hanoi's ass, you know, and close it down. Another side saying, let's let the South Vietnamese take care of it. Guess what? They're not going to.
Do you personally feel like the United States military lost the war in Vietnam?
I think the politicians caused the military to lose it. Look, let's be honest, Sharon. Guys won't like this, but when you have to get on a helicopter on top of a building and get the hell out of the country, you're evacuating, okay? And South Vietnam is one country now. It's a communist, it's kind of communist. They call it communists. They're really pretty capitalistic. But yeah, we had to leave. We didn't. You know, there were 60,000 guys here. What did we win? I don't know. Tell me.
Did you find that it was therapeutic to start the Vietnam Veterans of Delaware County group, talking with other veterans?
I think so. I think guys really are comfortable getting with other vets, and some of them are really, there's some real anger issues, you know, in some guys, and they were more comfortable being with other vets saying, oh yeah, man, you know, I was down there at Saigon or something, and I was with the Army or I was with the Navy off the Mekong Delta. So they would express things they wouldn't talk to other people about, and not because they wanted to lock them out, but because there was no point. They probably wouldn't understand what they was talking about. So I think it was, you know, guys like being with other vets. Still today, when, you know, on Veterans Day, I ended up with a bunch of old Vietnam vets at Bruner's, you know, shooting the shit, you know, talking about, you know, whatever. Yeah, we get together all the time. Yeah.
What do you guys often talk about? Your wartime experiences, or?
Whatever, you know, going back to Vietnam, like we talked about, you know, I did last year, and some of the guys said, man, I don't think I'd want to do that, and others saying, yeah, I might, you know, and we gossip about what one guy did or didn't do, you know, one guy in the paper, yeah, he's always blowing off, and we were like, yeah, we know he was a mailman, you know, we know what the hell.
What did you think of rear echelon guys when you were
in the rear with the gear? Rear echelon motherfuckers is what they was called. They'll be some of the first ones in the parade, though, marching. But that's okay.
Can you tell me a little bit more about going back to Vietnam? This was last summer, right? 2008?
June of 2008, yeah. Jerry Waite from Ball State invited 4 of us Vietnam veterans to be unofficial academic advisors to go with. I think there was 12 students. They were anthropology majors, nice kids, history. They don't have a clue about Vietnam, so we flew the 10,000 miles there. It was a grueling flight. I joined them in Hoi An, went up to Hue in Hanoi. I spent 8 days there with them. I think the students were there a total of about 20. Mostly in big cities, which I had never seen in my life in Vietnam. I was out in the boonies. I don't even know where I was at most of the time in Vietnam. There's no signs out there in Vietnam, no road markers. So we were in the cities. The Vietnamese were pleasant. They were nice. They would ask me if I was a soldier there during the American War. Yes, I was over here during the American War. They call it the American War. There was not one American franchise in that whole country that I saw. I looked for McDonald's or Walmart. I didn't see anything in the cities except one had cracked it, and I don't know how they did it. Kentucky Fried Chicken was over at KFC. I saw one in Hue. And I was starving for some. I hated that rice and shit we was eating there, and I said, KFC, and the professor and all the students was like, he was a little pissed. He was like, Jerry, we flew 10,000 miles. We came here to immerse in Vietnamese culture. And I was, Jerry, I'm going to immerse in some of that chicken. And students said, we're going with Griffis. So we had some KFC there. And so it was an interesting trip there, man, you know. But it was mostly city, Vietnamese city culture I hadn't seen.
Did memories flood back, good or bad?
A little bit. You know, we on the road, you could see the huts out there and the rice paddies and the water buffalo and the straw cone hats. Nothing had changed, you know. It's basically time was standing still. And a lot of them could get by in English pretty well, and their currency was dong now instead of piastres, so everything over there was marked with Ho Chi Minh's likeness, you know, and the money, the village, the statues, everything. Ho Chi Minh is God over there, you know, and they've got him freeze dried. We saw him at the went through the Ho Chi Minh Monument there in Hanoi, walked past. He's in a glass thing. I don't know how they've done that, and there was 4 guards standing around him, and so we saw Ho Chi Minh there at Hanoi, and.
Did you reflect on your military service while you were there at all, or?
Not so much. I kind of wanted to get back down to Chu Lai. I was about 20 miles from it. Jerry, and I'm sure he knew what he was talking about, said there's absolutely nothing there. Those bases are gone. They've been leveled. There's nothing there, so you can't go back and find where the 9th Engineers was. It's not like those huts are there anymore. Plus, it's been 40 years, and the jungle takes back stuff. And the South Vietnamese tropics pretty strong, and the Vietnamese had bulldozed all the South Vietnamese soldiers' graves. They were all leveled out by the North Vietnamese. So it really wasn't a military type visit. It was almost more like, you know, a civilian tourist over there. You know, there wasn't a lot of military connection there for me, anyway.
A lot of veterans have had a hard time dealing with their service, post-traumatic stress disorder. Have you ever had any problems dealing with some of the things that you had to see or do while in Vietnam?
I don't know. Whether I get angry, you know, I always wrestle with, if you get mad and want to fight over something that maybe you shouldn't, I don't know if that's Vietnam or DNA. I've never really figured that out, you know. I don't know. Maybe if I never saw Vietnam, I'd be exactly the same person I am now. I don't know.
It's something you just don't really think about all that much. You just.
I don't really. You know, I had a nightmare once or twice when I was back, or a bad dream or whatever, and it was always the same. It was dark. It was coming through the wire, and beyond that, it wasn't really anything beyond that. So, you know, the guys that are carrying around a lot of baggage, I sympathize with them, and I don't get it, you know, and I hope they get over it. And other times, I'm not sure if there was problems before they went in service, or Vietnam or Iraq or wherever. I don't know. I don't know.
That's pretty much. Those are pretty much all the questions that I had planned to ask. At this point in the interview, I'd like to give you the opportunity to maybe fill in a gap. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to tell me about that you think should be captured on this oral history, about your experience in Vietnam, about coming home, about anything, whatever comes to mind?
No, I'll tell you, you covered ground. I can't, you know, I've talked probably more from you than I have in 20 years with anybody about anything. Like most vets, I don't even, you know, my wife, you don't go over a lot of stuff. But no, you covered, you know, all there is to know, almost. You know, I got in some trouble in the Marine Corps. You know, stupid stuff, getting drunk, which ironically I don't even like to drink. So, you know, I was arrested in Tijuana. Spent a weekend in jail down there, horrendous jail. Got bailed out by the military. They come down every weekend and get the sailors, Marines out. You know, they're just a system, get you out. Got in some trouble in Hawaii. I got 30 days in a brig there. I wasn't I had an honorable discharge and all that, but it was just doing stupid stuff, you know. So, And I think that happens. And somebody told me, said there's some really good combat Marines, though, that really had a problem with discipline sometimes. And I don't know if that was from home, from other issues. Marine Corps didn't have anything to do with that or not, but I had some problems there. And the only other thing, this doesn't have anything to do with me with the interview. I'm glad to see nowadays that veterans are respected a lot more, regardless of who it is right now. And I'm watching this a lot, whether they're Hollywood, most left or right or whatever politically, saying, Iraq sucks, we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They're all, well, we respect the veteran, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm seeing that's changed, and I think that's a good idea. They're saying, we're not blaming the veterans. Don't pick where they go. They don't, or what they do. So I think that's a good thing, and I'm kind of glad to see that. Well, Jerry, thanks a lot for